everyone, my name is Morgan Layton, and I'm a music student at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm excited for the opportunity today to discuss Ethel Smyth. Now, this is a popular name. There is Ethel Smyth, the American organist, Ethel Smyth, the Olympian, Ethel Smyth, the golf player, but today I'm going to be discussing Ethel Smyth, the British composer. Raised during the Victorian age, Smyth fought against social restrictions that said a woman should not have a profession. She insisted on an education, and she insisted on performances of her works, and she insisted on having those works published. Today, Smyth should be praised as a champion of women's rights and a pioneer in the classical music world, but today she's still relatively unknown. Eugene Gates, a faculty member at the University of Illinois, says she does not measure up against her male colleagues' standards, that she will always be known as a woman composer. Despite that, let's talk a little bit about her family background. So Ethel Smyth was the fourth of 8 children. She was born in Sidcup, England. While the 22nd of April was her actual birthday, Smyth's family often celebrated it on the 23rd because they liked the coincidence that this was also William Shakespeare's birthday. Smyth's father, a major general in the Royal Artillery, was opposed to her musical career from the beginning. Despite her father's wishes, at the age of 17, she was allowed to advance her musical education at the Leipzig Conservatory in Germany. A year later, she left this conservatory due to low standards of teaching. But with the relationship she built while at the conservatory, she was able to continue her practice privately. Her compositions include songs, works for piano, chamber music, orchestral works, choral works, and operas. Speaking of operas, today I'm going to be talking about the Wrecker's Opera. I chose this opera today to present because it's a lesser-known opera, and I love the mysterious fisherman mood in this opera. I thought the story was very unique. So a little bit about the opera. The Wrecker's Opera takes place in a Cornish village in England. It was after a walking tour in Cornwall in 1886 that this idea came to her. The old tales of Cornish villages is where, on stormy nights, the inhabitants lured passing sailing ships onto the rugged Atlantic coast, which was a commonplace activity in the late 19th century. The cargoes plundered were regarded as legitimate reward for the hardships endured in this isolated, barren part of the country. For several years, Smyth visited places where shipwrecks were said to have been engineered and interviewed anyone with any evidence or memories of these wrecks. A fuller quote from Smyth's memoir says, "Ever since those days, I have been haunted by impressions of the strange world of more than 100 years ago, the plundering of ships lured onto the rocks by the falsification or extinction of the coastlights, the relentless murder of their crews, and with all that ingrained religiosity of the Celtic population of the barren Promontory." Now, this opera had much praise and some negative comments. So some of the praise said in the critics back in the day was, "Its greatest strength is its dramatic strategy, strikingly prolific details such as offstage church service sets against the foreground confirmation in Act 1. It was also very widely negatively regarded. It says here, musically, Smyth was no Wagnerite, which is a comparison to Richard Wagner. She makes use of his motivic technique while the texture, orchestration, and even some music is dramatically dense, showing knowledge of Richard Strauss, but it also slips into something ordinary and conventional. Despite Smyth's efforts, this opera took 5 years after the composition was finished to be performed. Smyth had originally written the opera in French, but could not get it performed in France. Therefore, she had to fall back onto her contacts in Leipzig. The German opera had many cuts, which upset Smyth, but when the director refused to restore the cut material, Smyth then took an extraordinary step of marching into the orchestra's pit, removing all the parts of the full score, making further performances relatively impossible. Rare stage performances have taken place in England since 1939. It was performed by the Acadian Opera in 2018 and again during the 22 Glyndebourne Festival of Opera. The opera is now being translated into many different languages and is being performed more often all around the world. I want to talk a little bit about her part in the suffrage movement. So, in 1910, Smyth joined the Women's Social and Political Union, which promoted the women's suffrage movement, giving up 2 years of her life to devote herself to the cause. Now, I know personally this would be very hard to do, completely devote 2 years of your life, taking time off work to just completely immerse yourself for a cause. Smyth accompanied Emily Pankhurst, the leader of the Women's Social and Political Union, on many occasions. Pankhurst was named the Times Top 100 Most Important Women in the 20th Century for her participation in this movement, which eventually led to women's right to vote in the United Kingdom. Smyth was one of 109 members who responded to Pankhurst's call asking to be sent to attack the home of Colonel Secretary Lewis Harcourt, who had remarked that if his wife's beauty and wisdom presented in all women, that they would already have the right to vote. After this incident, she was arrested with over 100 other women, for which she served 2 months in the Holloway prison. Her composition of The March of Women, composed in 1911, became the anthem for the suffragette movement. When Thomas Beecham, her friend, came to visit her at the prison, he found her and the suffragettes marching and singing along to this song, while Smyth leaned out the window, conducting the women with her toothbrush. Some interesting facts about her personal life. It has been said that Smyth has had many passionate affairs throughout her life, most of them being with women. Her philosopher friend and librettist in some of her operas, Henry Bennett Brewster, may have been the only male lover she ever had. She met with Willie Wilde, the brother of Oscar Wilde, during a trip to Ireland, and they quickly became engaged on the railway journey throughout Ireland. She then broke off this engagement 3 weeks later. Smyth was actively involved in sports throughout her life. In her youth, she was a keen horseback rider and tennis player. She was also a passionate golfer and member of the ladies section of the Working Golf Club where she lived. After she died, she was cremated. Her ashes were, as she had requested, scattered in the woods neighboring the club where she golfed. A few of her outstanding accomplishments throughout her life, besides her involvement in the suffragette movement, were: in recognition of her work as a composer and writer, Smyth was made Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1922, becoming the first female composer to be awarded a damehood. Smyth received honorary doctorate degrees of music at the universities of Durham and Oxford. Her opera Der Wald, which means the forest, was the first work by a woman composer performed at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. It remains the only opera by a woman composer staged at the Met for the next 113 years. It was in 2016 when L'amour de loin by Kaya Saraho was performed in September of that year. On her 75th birthday in 1934, under Beecham's direction, her work was celebrated in a festival, the final event which was held at the Royal Albert Hall in the presence of the Queen. Heartbreakingly, at this moment, although it was long overdue, the composer was already deaf and could not even hear her own music or the applause of the whole crowd. Thank you so much for joining me today.